The afternoon sun burned hot on the cracked pavement as cars rushed past the small grocery store. A red sports car gleamed in the lot, its paint shining like fire in the daylight. Near the car, a young black girl in a bright yellow shirt walked out holding her bag of groceries. Her name was Aaliyah, and she had worked double shifts for months to pay off that car. It wasn't just metal and wheels to her, it was proof she was strong enough to build her own life. But today, her pride became the spark for something she never saw coming. A police cruiser rolled up, its sirens silent but lights flashing red and blue. A tall officer stepped out, his uniform sharp and his jaw clenched like stone. His eyes locked on her as if she had already done something wrong. "That car," he said, pointing. His voice was cold, certain. "It's stolen." Aaliyah froze, the bag nearly slipping from her hands. "No, it's mine," she answered firmly, her heart pounding. She reached into her pocket for the keys, wanting to show him. But before she could even speak again, the officer moved closer, his hand ready to grab her arm. "Young lady, don't lie to me," he snapped. "We got reports. Step away from the vehicle." People nearby stopped to watch, whispers spreading like wildfire. Some pulled out their phones. To them, it looked like just another arrest. To Aaliyah, it felt like her whole life was being stolen in plain sight. "It's my car," she shouted, louder this time. Her voice cracked with both fear and fury. She held up the keys. "I worked for it, I bought it, I have the papers." But the officer didn't want to listen. His hand clamped around her wrist. He twisted her arm, ignoring her protest. Her face tightened in pain, but she didn't back down. "Stop resisting," he barked. His words sounded practiced, almost rehearsed, as if he had said them many times before. The world blurred around her. The sound of cars, the buzz of voices, everything mixed together. She thought about all the nights she walked home after long shifts, saving every dollar. She thought about her mother who told her, "This car will be your freedom." Now in just minutes, that freedom was being ripped away. Aaliyah's anger burned hotter than her fear. "You're wrong," she screamed. "This is mine." Her words echoed through the lot. Then something strange happened. Among the crowd, a man in a gray hoodie stepped forward. His face was calm, but his eyes sharp, like he had been waiting for this moment. Nobody knew him, but he walked with the kind of certainty that made people step aside. He spoke, not loudly, but his voice carried. "Officer, let her go." The cop turned, surprised. "Stay out of this," he growled, but the man didn't move back. He looked at Aaliyah, then at the car, then back at the officer. "I said let her go. That car is hers. And if you don't stop, justice will stop you." The officer laughed bitterly, tightening his grip on Aaliyah. "Oh yeah? And who are you supposed to be?" The man in the hoodie didn't answer. Instead, he raised his phone. Its screen glowed, already recording everything. The officer's badge, the girl's pain, the voices of the crowd. More phones lifted in the air. Dozens of cameras now pointed at the cop. For the first time, the officer's grip loosened. He looked around and saw what he hadn't noticed before. The people weren't just watching anymore. They were witnesses. They were gathering like a storm, their silence heavy, their eyes sharp. Aaliyah pulled her arm free, her wrist red where his hand had held her. She stood taller, despite her shaking breath. The man in the hoodie stepped beside her, almost like a shield. "You made a mistake," the man said calmly to the cop. "And now, everyone can see it." The officer's jaw tightened. His authority, once unquestioned, now cracked under the weight of so many eyes. But he didn't back down. Instead, he reached for his radio, muttering into it for backup. The crowd stirred, the air charged like before a storm. Aaliyah clutched her keys in her fist, her eyes blazing. She knew this wasn't over. The war had begun not with weapons, but with truth, pride, and a fight for justice that would not end here. The air in the parking lot grew heavier. People whispered, cameras pointed, and the flashing lights of the cruiser painted the scene in harsh red and blue. Aaliyah stood with her chest rising and falling quickly, her wrist still aching where the officer had grabbed her. She held her car keys like a weapon, not because they could hurt anyone, but because they were proof that the car was hers. The officer glared at the man in the hoodie, his hand still hovering near his holster. "You think filming me makes you right?" he barked. His voice cracked, betraying the pressure he felt under so many eyes. The man in the hoodie didn't flinch. "It doesn't make me right," he replied calmly. "It just makes the truth impossible to bury." His phone stayed steady, the red recording light blinking. Aaliyah looked at him. She didn't know who he was, but in that moment, his presence felt like armor. For the first time since the officer stopped her, she felt she wasn't alone. The officer raised his radio to call again for backup, but before he spoke, another voice came from the crowd. A middle-aged woman in a business suit stepped forward, holding up her own phone. "I saw everything," she said firmly. "That girl didn't steal anything. You grabbed her without cause. And now the whole world is about to see it." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. More phones came up, more voices whispered louder. It was no longer just a confrontation. It was turning into a stage with the officer at the center. The cop's face reddened. He took a step back but puffed his chest, trying to hold on to the authority that seemed to be slipping away. "All of you, back up," he shouted. "This is official police business." But the crowd didn't move. Instead, they closed in slightly, a circle forming, not aggressive, but strong. They weren't just watching anymore. They were guarding. Aaliyah's heart pounded. Her fear still there, but slowly being replaced by something else. Anger, yes, but also courage. She raised her voice, speaking not just to the officer, but to everyone around. "This is my car," she said clearly. "I bought it. I worked for it. And he tried to take it from me." Her words hung in the air, sharp and undeniable. The people listened. And then, as if on cue, they began to chant softly at first, then louder. "Let her go. Let her go." The officer's hands shook as he gripped his radio. Backup was coming. He had called for it. But even he could feel it now. Backup might not save him from what was unfolding. The man in the hoodie leaned closer to Aaliyah and whispered, "Stay strong. Justice always comes, even if it walks slow." His words settled into her chest like fire. Moments later, another patrol car arrived, tires screeching as it stopped. 2 more officers stepped out. Their faces showed confusion as they saw the crowd, the raised phones, the chanting, and their fellow officer standing cornered. "What's going on here?" one of them asked cautiously. Before the first cop could speak, the woman in the business suit answered. "What's going on is your colleague tried to arrest this young lady for stealing her own car. We all saw it." She gestured at the crowd, at the dozens of phones raised high. The new officers exchanged looks. They weren't blind. They knew the power of a crowd armed with cameras. One of them stepped toward Aaliyah, his voice softer than the first officer's. "Miss, do you have proof that the car belongs to you?" Without hesitation, Aaliyah dug into her bag with trembling hands and pulled out a folded paper. The title document, signed and stamped. She held it up high so not just the officers, but everyone around could see. Gasps and murmurs spread. The document was undeniable. It was hers. The crowd cheered, clapping, their voices rising like thunder. "It's hers! It's hers!" The first officer's face turned pale, then red again. His mouth opened as if to argue, but no words came. His authority shattered in front of everyone, replaced by the weight of his mistake. One of the new officers turned to him. "You need to step back," he said firmly. "Right now." The crowd roared louder, sensing victory. But Aaliyah didn't smile. Her hands still shook, her chest still burned. She knew this wasn't over. She had been humiliated, accused, almost dragged away for something she never did. Proof cleared her name, but it didn't erase what had happened. The man in the hoodie put his phone down, his recording complete. He looked at her with steady eyes. "This is only the beginning," he said. "Justice isn't done yet. Karma has a long memory." Aaliyah swallowed hard, staring at the officer who had grabbed her. For a second, she almost pitied him. He stood there sweating, his career slipping through his fingers, trapped by the truth he tried to bury. But then she remembered the pain in her wrist, the shame of being called a thief in front of strangers. No, she thought. He chose this. And justice would choose him in return. The war wasn't won yet. It had only just begun. The parking lot buzzed like a beehive. People clapped, shouted, and raised their phones higher, making sure nothing was missed. Aaliyah stood with the paper in her hand, the title of her car shaking slightly from her trembling fingers. Proof had silenced the officer, but silence wasn't enough. Not for her. The first officer, his jaw clenched tight, tried to straighten his shoulders as if the crowd's roar didn't crush him. Sweat ran down his temple. He had been so sure, so confident when he grabbed her. Now the truth exposed him, and he looked like a soldier on the losing side of a war. The new officers tried to calm the scene. "Everyone, step back, please," one of them called out. But the crowd didn't listen. The chants grew stronger. "Justice! Justice! Justice!" Aaliyah's wrist throbbed, red and swollen from his grip. She lifted it into the air, showing everyone the mark he left. Gasps spread through the crowd again, and anger sparked brighter. "You hurt her!" Someone shouted. "She told you it was hers." Another voice called out. The officer opened his mouth, searching for words. I had reason to believe." "No," the man in the hoodie cut in, his voice loud and sharp. "You had reason to humiliate her. You had reason to assume she didn't belong to what she owned. That's not law. That's prejudice." The crowd roared with agreement. The officer's face flushed red. His hand hovered near his belt, but he knew he couldn't use force now. Too many eyes, too many cameras. Aaliyah's heart raced, but she didn't back away. For the first time, she felt taller than the man who had tried to drag her down. "You called me a thief," she said, her voice steady though her body shook. "You tried to take away everything I worked for. And you thought nobody would care." Her words hit like arrows. The officer looked away, his authority crumbling brick by brick. The new officers exchanged glances. One of them muttered something into his radio, likely reporting the chaos. Backup wasn't going to save the first officer, now it might only make things worse. Then, a voice came from the edge of the crowd. A man in a suit, carrying a briefcase, stepped forward. He looked sharp, professional, and his eyes scanned the scene with quick calculation. "I'm a lawyer," he announced. "And I saw everything. If this young woman wants to press charges, I'll represent her right now." The crowd gasped again, then cheered louder. Aaliyah blinked in shock. She hadn't expected help not like this. But the lawyer's gaze was steady, his offer clear. The officer stiffened. His world was collapsing fast. What had begun as a simple stop was spiraling into something bigger than he ever imagined, something he couldn't control. The man in the hoodie stepped closer to Aaliyah and whispered, "This is your moment. Don't let fear take it from you." Aaliyah clenched her fists, her car keys biting into her palm. Fear still lived in her chest, but now it burned with something else: resolve. She turned to the lawyer. "Yes," she said firmly. "I want to press charges." The crowd exploded with cheers. Phones captured every word, every movement. The officer stumbled back as if struck. "This isn't fair," he shouted, his voice breaking. "I was doing my job." "No," Aaliyah shot back, her eyes locked on him. "You were abusing it." Her voice carried across the lot, over the noise, over the fear. For a moment, everything went silent. Even the officer couldn't find words to fight back. Then a new sound broke through, the distant hum of news vans. The media had arrived, drawn by the flood of live streams and social posts already spreading like wildfire. Cameras larger than phones now rolled onto the scene, their reporters pushing through the crowd. Double quotes, "Miss, can you tell us what happened?" One shouted. Aaliyah's breath caught. She wasn't used to this. But the man in the hoodie nodded at her, silently urging her to speak. The lawyer gave her a reassuring smile. And so she did. She held up the title, lifted her wrist, and told the truth in front of the cameras. Her words poured out, how she worked for the car, how the officer accused her, how he twisted her arm, how the crowd stood by her side. Every word became a weapon, and the cameras carried it further than the parking lot, further than the town. It was flying into homes, phones, and screens everywhere. The officer, once so powerful, now looked small. His badge glinted under the harsh sunlight, but its shine meant nothing. His reputation, his authority, his very name were being dragged into the light, judged by the world. Aaliyah felt her chest swell with both fear and relief. She hadn't planned this, hadn't wanted it. But now it was happening, and she realized she couldn't stop it. She didn't want to stop it. Justice wasn't finished. Karma hadn't struck yet, but she could feel it coming. The man in the hoodie leaned close one more time, his eyes glimmering strangely, almost too sharp, too knowing. "This is bigger than you think," he whispered. The world needed to see this, and now they have. Aaliyah turned to him, questions burning on her tongue, but before she could ask, he slipped back into the crowd, vanishing like a shadow. Her story wasn't over. It was only growing louder. The news crews swarmed like bees around honey. Reporters leaned forward, microphones outstretched, cameras capturing every angle. The crowd pressed tighter, their chants fading into a tense silence as the world's attention shifted to Aaliyah. She stood in the middle of it all, her yellow shirt bright against the storm of flashing lights. Her wrist still throbbed, her voice shook, but her eyes burned with determination. She never asked to be here, but she was here now. "This officer tried to arrest me for stealing my own car," she said into the microphones. Her voice echoed across the lot. "He hurt me, called me a thief, and ignored the proof right in my hand." Gasps rippled through the crowd again. The camera zoomed in on her swollen wrist, on the folded car title still clutched in her fingers. The liar beside her nodded, his voice calm and cutting. "This is a clear abuse of power. This young woman has rights, and today the world sees what happens when those rights are trampled." The officer, trapped between the crowd and the cameras, tried to push forward. "This is all being twisted," he shouted. "You don't understand. I had a report. I was doing my job." But his words only made the crowd angrier. "Liar!" someone shouted. "Abuser!" yelled another. The chanting began again, louder and stronger than before. "Justice! Justice! Justice!" The two new officers stood stiff, unsure what to do. One muttered, "This is out of control." The other nodded, whispering back, "It's too late to stop it." For the first time, the first officer's face betrayed something other than anger, fear. He glanced at the cameras, at the witnesses, at the hundreds of phones still recording. His career flashed before his eyes, not as triumph, but as ashes. Aaliyah took a shaky breath and looked straight into one of the news cameras. "I worked 2 jobs to pay for that car," she said. "It was my dream, my freedom. He tried to take it because he thought I couldn't own something like it. But I won't let him steal my dignity too." The crowd erupted in cheers, the noise rising so high that even the helicopter circling above could probably hear. And then, from the side of the lot, another group entered the scene. City officials, their suits crisp, their faces tight with worry. One of them, a woman with a stern expression, pushed her way forward. She was the mayor. She raised her hand, and the crowd slowly quieted. Her voice carried with authority, not shouted but commanding. "I've seen enough," she said. This officer will be placed under investigation immediately. The cheer that followed nearly shook the ground. The officer staggered as though struck, his knees weak. "You can't just," he started, but the mayor cut him off. "You embarrassed this city today," she said sharply. "And you harmed an innocent citizen. There will be consequences." The crowd roared again, and reporters shouted questions, their microphones nearly colliding. The mayor's security detail guided her closer to Aliyah, and for a moment, the world seemed to pause. The mayor looked directly at her. "You showed courage today," she said softly, so only those nearby could hear. "You stood when many would have broken. Don't let anyone take that from you." Tears burned at the corners of Aliyah's eyes, but she refused to let them fall. She nodded slowly. "Thank you," she whispered. But even with the mayor's words, the storm wasn't over. The officers' backup had arrived, more cruisers, more uniforms. They formed a line at the edge of the lot, uncertain whether to intervene or to retreat. The crowd grew restless, the air buzzing like static before lightning. The lawyer leaned close to Aliyah. "This is bigger than one officer," he said. "It's the system. And the system doesn't like to be challenged. Be ready." Aliyah clenched her fists, the keys still biting her palm. She had never asked for a fight. She only wanted to go home with her groceries, to drive her car, to live her life. But life had pushed her onto a battlefield she couldn't walk away from now. The man in the hoodie, who had disappeared earlier, reappeared at the edge of the crowd. His hood was still pulled low, but his eyes locked on hers for a moment. He didn't smile, didn't wave, but there was a strange glimmer in his gaze, something that told her this wasn't coincidence. He had known this was coming. As the chants rose again, as the reporters shouted questions, as the officer sagged under the weight of his mistake, Aliyah realized something. This wasn't just about her anymore. This was about everyone who had ever been silenced, doubted, or accused for simply existing. She turned toward the cameras once more, her voice steady despite the storm. "This isn't just my fight," she said. "It's ours." The crowd roared like thunder, and for the first time, Aliyah felt not just like a victim, but like a leader standing at the heart of an unexpected war. The roar of the crowd refused to fade. People chanted louder, their voices rising like a tide that even sirens could not drown. The mayor's words had struck hard, but the tension still lived in the air, sharp and heavy. The first officer stood pale and sweating, his hands shaking at his sides. He had come with authority, but now he looked like a man stranded in a storm with no shelter. Aliyah stood firm, clutching her car title in one hand and her keys in the other. She could feel the bruise on her wrist throbbing, a reminder of how quickly her freedom had almost been taken. But now, with the cameras still aimed at her, she felt something different. Power. The lawyer at her side whispered, "We'll make this official. We'll press charges, and he'll face the law." But Aliyah shook her head slowly. "It's not enough," she said under her breath. "If I walk away now, people will forget tomorrow. They'll say it was just one mistake." Her eyes burned with determination. "This isn't just about me anymore. It's about all of us." The lawyer studied her, then gave a small nod. "Then say it. Don't hold back." The cameras rolled closer, hungry for her words. Reporters shoved microphones toward her face. She took a deep breath and raised her voice. "How many times has this happened before?" she asked, her voice carrying across the lot. "How many times has someone been accused, humiliated, or hurt just for existing? Today you all saw it happen to me. Tomorrow it could be your sister, your brother, your child. If we don't stop it now, it will never stop." The crowd erupted in cheers. People raised their fists, their voices united in the chant, "No more! No more! No more!" The officer, trapped in the center of it all, finally snapped. "This is madness!" he shouted, his face twisted with desperation. "I had reason to stop her. I was following procedure. But no one listened. His words bounced off the wall of voices, drowned out by chants of justice. Then the man in the hoodie appeared again, this time pushing through the crowd until he stood right behind Aaliyah. His hood shadowed his face, but his presence drew eyes. He raised his own phone high, its screen glowing with a live broadcast. Tens of thousands of viewers were already watching, their comments scrolling across the screen. "You're live to the world now," he said quietly to Aaliyah, his voice steady. "This is bigger than this lot. Bigger than this city. Don't stop." Aaliyah looked at him, a flicker of fear in her eyes, but also strength. She turned back to the cameras and shouted, "We are not thieves of our own lives. We are not guilty for daring to dream. We will not be silenced anymore." The chant shifted instantly, the crowd echoing her words. Not thieves. Not guilty. Not silenced. The officer stumbled back, as if the words themselves were blows. He looked around wildly, searching for support. But the two other officers kept their distance, their faces tight with unease. They didn't move to help him. They didn't want to be dragged into the storm. Then the sound of heavy boots echoed as another unit arrived, not police, but officials from the city's internal affairs. Their jackets bore the seal of oversight. The crowd parted for them, a hush falling as they marched toward the officer. "You're relieved of duty, effective immediately," one of them said coldly. He pulled the officer's badge straight from his chest. Gasps filled the lot, followed by cheers so loud they shook the air. The officer's face turned ghost white as the badge left his uniform. He looked down at his empty chest, as if a piece of his identity had been torn away. "No. This isn't how it's supposed to end," he whispered. But no one listened. The cameras captured it all, the badge taken, the crowd cheering, Aaliyah standing tall at the center. The news anchors watching live would call it a turning point before the sun even set. Aaliyah's knees trembled, but she refused to fall. She had started this day as a girl buying groceries. Now she was the voice of a movement. The mayor returned to her side and leaned close. "You lit a fire today. It will spread. But be ready, fires burn back too. There will be those who want revenge." Aaliyah nodded, her eyes still locked on the disgraced officer as he was led away. "Let them come," she said softly. "I'm not afraid anymore." The crowd roared louder, as if the universe itself answered her. The man in the hoodie lowered his phone, his live stream ending, but his gaze lingered on Aaliyah. There was something strange in his eyes, something that told her this was far from over. He disappeared back into the sea of people once more, leaving her with questions she couldn't shake. And as the crowd carried her name on their lips, as the city began to tremble under the weight of her courage, Aaliyah realized one thing. This wasn't the end. It was the beginning of something far larger than she had ever imagined. Justice had struck one man, but karma was just getting started. The night sky settled over the city, but the echoes of the day refused to fade. News stations replayed the footage again and again, the officer grabbing Aaliyah, the crowd rising, the mayor intervening, and finally the badge being stripped away. Social feeds filled with her face, her words, her courage. By the time darkness fell, millions already knew her story. Aaliyah sat on the hood of her red car, her groceries still inside untouched. Her wrist throbbed, her heart still beat fast, but she was calm in a way she hadn't been before. The parking lot was nearly empty now. The cameras had gone, the chants had faded, but she could still feel the weight of everything that had happened. The lawyer stayed nearby, speaking quietly on his phone about paperwork and lawsuits. The mayor had left hours ago, promising a formal investigation. The officer was gone too, led away with his head down, his future uncertain. But the man in the hoodie stood at the edge of the lot, silent, watching. He hadn't left when the others did. He hadn't spoken since his last words. He just stood there, a shadow under the streetlight. Aaliyah finally walked toward him, her steps slow, cautious. "Who are you?" she asked softly. He lowered his hood, and for the first time, she saw his face clearly. He was young, not much older than her, but his eyes carried something ancient, like he had seen storms rise and fall before. "I'm nobody," he said quietly. "Just someone who knows that truth has power if people dare to show it." "But you were there before anyone else," she pressed. "You recorded everything. You pushed me to speak. Why?" He gave a faint smile. "Because justice needs witnesses. And sometimes, it needs someone to remind others not to be afraid." His words lingered in her mind, heavy but steady. She wanted to ask more, but something in his eyes told her she wouldn't get answers. He wasn't here for recognition. He was here because the moment needed him. The lawyer approached, his face stern. "You've made history today, Aaliyah. But history is heavy. People will call you a hero, but others will call you a liar. They'll try to drag your name through the mud to protect themselves." "I know," she said, her voice quiet but sure. She looked at her car, then at her bruised wrist. "But if I stay silent, it will all happen again. If I speak, maybe someone else will be spared." The lawyer nodded. "Then you'll need to be ready. This is only the beginning." That night, she drove home in her car for the first time since the arrest. The wheel felt different, under her hands heavier, but also stronger, like it carried not just her, but everyone who had stood with her. As the streetlights flickered past, she thought of her mother's words, "This car will be your freedom." She hadn't known freedom could mean more than driving to work, more than buying groceries without fear. Now freedom meant standing for herself and for others. The next morning, the world had changed. Her face was on the front page of papers, her words replayed on television, her chant spreading online. Not thieves. Not guilty. Not silenced. Messages poured into her phone, support from strangers, invitations to speak, promises of help. She hadn't asked for any of it, but it came anyway, carried by the force of truth. Meanwhile, the officer's story spread too. His name became a symbol of disgrace. His actions replayed endlessly, his silence louder than his excuses. He had tried to break her, but instead, he broke himself. Karma had struck him not with fists, but with truth. Later that week, Aaliyah stood on a stage at a community center. Hundreds gathered to hear her, the same way they had gathered in the lot. She looked at them, faces young and old, eyes full of hope and anger and determination. She felt the weight of their expectation, but also their strength. "I didn't plan for this," she began, her voice carrying across the room. "I just wanted to live my life. But when someone tried to take it from me, I realized silence helps no one. We have to speak, we have to stand, because justice doesn't come on its own. It comes when we fight for it." The crowd rose to their feet, clapping, shouting, echoing her words. At the back of the hall, the man in the hoodie watched again, silent, his hood pulled low. When her eyes met his, he gave a small nod, then slipped out the door. Aaliyah never saw him again, but she didn't need to. His lesson stayed with her. Truth needed witnesses. Justice needed courage. And sometimes, even the smallest voice could shake the world. That night, as she drove her red car home again, she smiled faintly. She had started as a girl accused of theft. Now she was something more, proof that dignity could not be stolen, and that when people stood together, karma always found its way. The war had ended, not with violence, but with truth. And truth had won.